Hello friends, today I'm going to show you how to find cheap real estate deals. So how do you find cheap real estate deals? Well, by the end of this video, you're going to know precisely where to look to find these cheap real estate deals. You're going to understand which factors contribute to low property prices, and you're going to learn how to assess these potential investments as a real estate investor. Are there any places out there that have cheap real estate deals right now? Are any of them worth buying, or are they littered with problems that make them unpurchasable? Well, let's answer these questions and dive into this topic by first explaining exactly what I do to find cheap real estate deals. Next, I'm going to explain why certain pockets have cheaper real estate deals than other places. And finally, I'm going to explain to you the pros and cons of cheap real estate. If you're ready, let's go. So what are the methods that I utilize to find cheap real estate deals? Well, I'll tell you all of them that I use right now. The first one I do is I go to Zillow and I set up filters. Now, when I say cheap real estate, I am talking about real estate that's under $100,000. So that's the first filter that I put on Zillow when I'm searching an area. And a lot of times I'm finding these cheap real estate deals in the Midwest. So for context, that's where I'm looking right now, but I'm gonna explain to you some other areas and why I like the Midwest here in a minute. But first off, I put my filter below $100,000. And I don't want multifamily, I don't want lots or land. So that's the next filter, as I say, single family homes, right? No townhomes, no condos, single family homes. And there are other filters I can put on, like bedroom count. I might not just want a 1 bedroom, 1 bath. I might want at least a 2 bedroom, or I might want a square footage that's above 600 square feet. All of these things are filters that you can put on. And typically that's what I'll start with. And I will dive in and start looking at Zillow on these homes. And I'll look at the pictures, which I'll just give you a little bit of a hack. If you're seeing something on Zillow and they have 0 pictures of the inside, be wary, be very wary of what the inside looks like, right? So as I look through these homes and I read the description as well. Now, if I want to go a step further, I might put a filter in Zillow that allows me just for homes that are for sale by owner or homes that have been on the market longer than 90 days, right? Because those are ones I can maybe offer lower prices on, which is exactly what you want to do with cheap real estate in order to deploy these strategies that I've talked about in other videos. Another way to find these cheap real estate deals is off-market real estate software. Now, there's a lot out there, but the one that I love and that I utilize is RealFlow. It allows you to pull so much data, MLS data, but finding deals that are off market, and you can specify exactly what you're looking for. You can go as deep as you want, whether you want foreclosures, pre-foreclosures, absentee owners, whatever it is, you can narrow it down to where there might just be a couple of properties that fit your deal. High equity, that could be another filter in there. You can also see the loans they've had on it, any liens, and how much they owe on the property. Something like RealFlow and most of the softwares out there cost money, but it is worth it to be able to find some of these deals, because otherwise you're just seeing what everybody else sees rather than finding off-market property deals. And just the last element that I use is I try to utilize realtors, right? I have a lot of emails that come to me automated because I've talked to realtors in these areas and said, listen, this is what I'm working for. Happy to use my realtor, but if something comes up that matches this, please send it to me. And a lot of times they just automate it, right? So they don't know what's going out, but they've got it populated to where a property pops up that fits the criteria you've asked for and an automated email comes to you. That's a great tool that I utilize, that I found a lot of properties utilizing realtors. So finding cheap real estate isn't necessarily challenging, but once you do find something you want to put an offer on, here's what I recommend. I recommend you putting offers at least 30 to 40% below what they're asking. Now, I know that seems like you might be taking advantage of it, but that's the only way these strategies work. And you might be doing somebody a favor by actually executing and closing on a piece of property and giving them money, even though it's below what they're asking for. And so my ratio looks something like this. There might be 10, 15, or 20 properties I'll put offers on before one gets accepted. So a ratio of 1 to 15 is not uncommon. So you've got to put a lot of offers out there, which is a lot of work. But once you find one that's accepted at that ratio, that means you have a lot of strategies at your disposal to be able to utilize to make some really good money. And always when I put an offer on these properties, because I don't know if I want to wholesale it or assign it to a different party out there, so I will always make the offer on these properties and or assigns. Now, what does that mean? It means that I can add somebody to it. Like if I said Aaron Peterson and or assigns is buying this property, I can add somebody to it if I need to get it on traditional financing, or I can assign that contract to somebody else at a higher price. So always putting the offer and or assigns on it is crucial. So now that we have a pretty good idea of how to find cheap properties, let's talk about the areas that have cheaper real estate than others, right? Now, the area I'm looking, as I mentioned, is the Midwest. And I'm looking for cities or areas or homes that have decent proximity to major metropolitan areas, right? So outside of St. Louis in Illinois is where I found a nice pocket of homes that I've bought property in. There's also some outside of Indianapolis. You've got some outside of like Dayton or Columbus or other areas, Cincinnati, that are in Ohio. But these areas of the Midwest honest, I found some pretty good deals on properties that actually have properties that had renters in them, that the properties weren't too bad, and I could utilize them right away. Whereas for the most part, that Sunbelt part of the United States, from California all the way over to Florida, the southern part of the United States, typically those are higher prices because it's a little bit more desirable area to live. However, I will tell you this, just recently, I started looking in parts of Texas and Louisiana, and I have found properties that meet my criteria that I'm starting to put offers on. And so are there properties out there in certain states that maybe you think didn't have cheap real estate, but do? There absolutely is. But here's a few things you need to consider when you're looking at cheap real estate deals. As I mentioned, you want to be closer to a large metropolitan area or larger metropolitan area. You got to think about if somebody needs to fly for work, an airport has to be kind of close. If it's a regional airport, that's great, but a major airport is even better. So if you're within an hour of a major metropolitan area, like an hour within St. Louis or an hour of Indianapolis or Cincinnati, you're going to be in a much better spot to find properties that could potentially increase in value as well as cities start to expand and grow. Another thing to consider, and this is really important, I tell everybody about this, is crime, right? I have found some properties I've thought, oh my gosh, I'm putting an offer on that. That looks amazing. It doesn't need much work. But I started researching the area. I found out that it was littered with crime and the type of crime that you don't want to be a part of, right? I don't know if you'd be able to sell a property in some of those areas. So doing your research on crime, and there's a lot of websites out there. So crimegrade.org is a great one, but there's a ton of them out there where you can do some research and really find out if there's a lot of crime in the area or if it's just outside some of those areas. That could still be a good real estate investment for you to deploy some of these strategies. Finally, let's finish up with some of the pros and cons of finding cheap real estate. Obviously, one of the bigger pros of finding cheap real estate is a lot less money out of your pocket. If you can buy it outright, great, that gives you some good negotiating power. But if you need to do traditional financing, you're looking at a lot less money down and a lot lower monthly payment than if you were to get a $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 piece of property. So your risk is definitely decreased when you find cheaper real estate. Another huge benefit of cheap real estate is you can engage a lot easier in some of these seller financing strategies that are out there when you do end up purchasing cheap real estate. Anything from just a traditional rental to a slow flip to a lease option. There are so many seller financing strategies that are available out there once you have a cheap piece of property in hand. So what are some of the negatives of cheap real estate? Well, I think the obvious one is it could be a rough looking home, right? And the chances of something wrong with that home is great, right? Because it's cheap and it's been around for a long time. It's probably has some wear and tear on it. It's maybe had renters in it who don't care as much. That is why I always, before I close on a home, I get a professional inspection that tells me exactly what might be wrong with this home. I actually took advantage of this on the last home that I put an offer on. It was listed at $75,000. I got it under contract for $53,000. I had a professional inspector go in there, and when they finished up, he said, listen, there's a problem with the foundation. It might cost you a lot of money to fix this. I did not want to go through that mess, so I opted not to execute and buy the home. And so that is one potential negative, right, of the home that's having a major problem. But if you do your inspection right, you're not going to run into that problem. And obviously the other negative is it might be in a crime area or close to a crime area. You've got to understand that going into it of what you're getting your hands into. So these are some things that I've seen when you buy cheap real estate to keep in mind, but I'd be interested in your feedback. What have you seen? Are you looking for cheap real estate? Comment below. Let's engage in a dialogue. And as always, just for stopping by and watching the video, I've got a free gift for you. It's aaronsfreetraining.com. It is a short-term rental calculator. Click on the link. When you open it up, you put in the price of the home, the income, the expenses, and it does all the work. It'll spit out to you whether it's a good deal or not, and it's 100% free, no obligation. Once again, I really appreciate you stopping by. Have an amazing day.